He says he's innocent. He says he's not guilty.
Lately, an unsettling whisper has been racing through the icy stone corridors of Buckingham Palace at an alarming speed. Even the most seasoned courtiers, who have seen every kind of royal crisis, are now reluctant to speak about it above a murmur. According to a well-placed palace insider, something that should never have existed has come to light in recent days, and it strikes at the very heart of the late Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. What has left many inside the royal household deeply uneasy is this. The name being repeatedly mentioned in hushed private conversations is not Queen Camilla, but her son, Tom Parker Bowles. And the person said to have stumbled upon what she was never meant to see is none other than the Duchess of Edinburgh, Sophie, the wife of Prince Edward, a figure long considered entirely removed from the palace's power struggles. Sources say Sophie left Tom Parker Bowles' private residence in a state of visible shock. No statement, no explanation, just prolonged silence and subsequent moves that have sent ripples of unrest through the royal household. That same night, Tom is understood to have made an urgent call to his mother, while certain doors inside the royal residence's long, kept firmly closed, are now under heavier guard than ever. What has been hidden for so long? Why can Sophie not simply pretend she saw nothing? And who will be dragged into this secret next? The crystal chandeliers high above cast only faint, wavering pools of light across the marble floor that had been polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. This was one of those rare nights when Buckingham Palace sank into an almost perfect silence, a silence that carried both majesty and the weight of secrets never meant to be spoken aloud. Along the corridor that led to the Queen's private working rooms, a slender figure moved without the slightest sound. It was Agnes, a maid in her 50s, hair pinned neatly back, her face etched with the quiet marks of nearly 30 years of silent service. Agnes was more than a maid. She was a cog in the ceaseless machinery of the palace, someone who had witnessed more of the royal family's upheavals than any tabloid could ever uncover. She was fiercely loyal to the legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II, whom she had served directly for 2 decades. To Agnes, the Queen's possessions were never mere objects. They were the very soul of the monarchy, history carved in gold and precious stone. Tonight, she was finishing her final shift, making sure every lamp was extinguished and every door locked after the powerful Queen had retired to her bedroom. As she passed an intricately carved oak door, Agnes stopped dead. That room, a small, secluded study, should have been sealed and silent hours ago. And Queen Camilla, who had ascended the throne in 2023 after Elizabeth's death, should long since have been asleep. Yet Agnes heard the low, urgent, unmistakably commanding voice of the Queen. The words slipped through the crack like shards of ice. "Must be moved tonight. No one is to know. They go straight to Tom's house. Not through the official vaults under any circumstances." Agnes knew instantly what they were. Days earlier, she had glimpsed an internal inventory of the late Queen's most precious, still unclassified relics. Coronation jewels, private letters, and above all, the official jewel box, the supreme emblem of female royal authority. From the broken fragments of conversation that followed, the truth assembled itself with chilling clarity. Camilla did not merely wish to store them. She wished to possess them. By hiding Elizabeth's last symbols of power in the private home of her son, Tom Parker Bowles, she was making an audacious move, seizing physical objects to cement her spiritual and political dominance. She was ensuring that, whatever shifts occurred in the family's balance of influence, she alone would hold the key to the past. Agnes shrank back into the corridor's shadows. A cold sweat broke across her skin. She understood the lethal danger of what she had overheard. This was not simple greed. It was betrayal of the royal legacy itself. If exposed, it could shake the British monarchy to its foundations. If she spoke, she would become the direct accuser of the Queen herself, an act that could cost her job, her reputation, perhaps even the quiet remainder of her life. Silence was the absolute discretion drilled into every servant, yet silence now would also be complicity. In the midst of her torment, the familiar crunch of tires sounded on the gravel outside the main entrance. Through a tall window, Agnes saw two figures step from a car. One was Princess Anne, the late Queen's famously upright daughter who placed duty above all else. The other was Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Sophie, married to Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, was beloved by the public for her elegance, her passionate charity work, and above all, for the deep, genuine bond she had shared with Elizabeth. Tonight, she and Anne had a long-scheduled meeting to discuss joint charitable trusts. Sophie's arrival struck Agnes like lightning. Sophie had not only been the late Queen's confidant, but the living embodiment of integrity and duty. Of all people, Sophie would grasp the catastrophic meaning of these stolen relics. Agnes stood motionless in the ancient stone corridor, the chill of the wall seeping through her back. She could not look away. She could not allow raw power to eclipse the legacy she had sworn to protect. Her gaze followed Sophie as she turned into the great hall beside Anne. The Duchess's steady, resolute bearing sent a strange surge of strength through Agnes. She made her choice. She would place loyalty to the royal heritage above her own safety. Turning from the study door, she walked toward the hall where Sophie now stood. A daring, solitary, perilous decision had taken shape in the darkness of the palace. The false calm had shattered, and on this night, an irreversible chain of events had begun. Agnes moved through the dim corridors as though every ancestral portrait on the walls was watching her guilty footsteps. Guilty because she dared drag the most explosive secret of the crown into the light. The door to the small anteroom, where Princess Anne and the Duchess of Sophie were meeting, loomed before her like a threshold of fate. She had to act now before Queen Camilla and her accomplices could finish spiriting away the relics. Sophie sat at the tea table, elegant and absorbed, turning pages of patronage reports. Since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, she had quietly shouldered many burdens, earning a reputation for scrupulousness and unshaken by baseless gossip. When Agnes appeared, face ashen, eyes strained yet resolute with the weight of nearly half a lifetime in service, Sophie sensed at once that something was gravely wrong. A maid as seasoned as Agnes would never interrupt a private, senior royal meeting unless the matter were catastrophic. Agnes said nothing at first. She merely gestured for permission to approach, then leaned close and poured the entire story into Sophie's ear in a breathless whisper. She recounted exactly where she had stood, who had spoken, and, most crucially, the intended destination of the relics, the private home of Tom Parker Bowles, son of Queen Camilla. At first, Sophie's expression was guarded, almost disbelieving. Direct accusations against the reigning queen were unthinkable. If false, they would destroy the messenger. Yet when the name Tom Parker Bowles was repeated, along with the detail that the items had already been removed from the royal vaults, the skepticism in Sophie's eyes gave way to an icy dread. She, more than almost anyone, understood the historical and spiritual weight of those objects. They were not personal trinkets. They were emblems of power handed down through the crown itself. To smuggle them beyond palace protection and hide them in the home of a commoner, even if he was the Queen's son, crossed every line. It was a direct assault on the integrity of the royal legacy, something the late Queen would never have forgiven. Sophie now faced an agonizing moral crossroads. To act would mean confronting Camilla head-on, unleashing an unprecedented political and familial crisis. Relationships within the royal family would fracture. Her own reputation would be dissected under the harshest scrutiny. To stay silent would make her complicit in the betrayal of every value of integrity, history, and loyalty to Elizabeth that she held sacred. Her conscience allowed no such silence. After a long, taut moment, a daring decision crystallized. She would not investigate quietly in the shadows. She would place the matter before the one person with ultimate authority. Sophie requested an immediate audience with King Charles. The meeting took place behind the closed doors of the king's private study, with no third person present. Charles, still striving to steady his new reign after years of upheaval, listened without visible emotion, but shock flickered unmistakably in his eyes. Sophie laid out the facts plainly, confining herself to evidence of the illicit transfer and avoiding speculation about motive. After a heavy silence that seemed to stretch forever, the king delivered his verdict. Whatever his private feelings toward Queen Camilla, his duty to the crown and to his mother's memory stood above everything. He authorized a discreet investigation on condition that not a whisper reached the public. More than that, he quietly instructed the head of royal protection to assign a hand-picked, utterly trustworthy team to shadow Sophie. It was both to safeguard the Duchess as she confronted those guarding a dangerous secret, and to allow the king to monitor and verify every step himself. Sophie left the king's study outwardly composed but inwardly steely. She knew a door had swung open that could never again be closed. This fight was not for personal honor. It was for the preservation of history itself. Her car, now discreetly followed by a protection vehicle, slipped out of the palace into the night, heading for Tom Parker Bowles's private villa, where the emblems of power lay hidden. Streetlights flashed across the windows, catching the cold, unyielding resolve on the Duchess's face. The car carried the Duchess of Edinburgh through the depths of the night to a quiet, private lane in Berkshire, where Tom Parker Bowles's country villa lay hidden among dark trees. The silence here offered no comfort. It felt like a perfect mask stretched over something rotten. The protection team dispatched by King Charles had already fanned out around the property, invisible and ready to move on Sophie's signal. Their presence was a cold reminder of how high the stakes had risen. Sophie stepped from the car. Her dark cashmere coat concealed her slight frame, lending her the air of quiet, dangerous authority, wrapped in danger beneath the thin moonlight. She led the search party herself, 3 plain-clothes protection officers and a senior royal collection curator. They carried the tools to search and to seal. But far more important was the unspoken warrant from the king. Entering the private home of the Queen's son was unprecedented, the weight of it pressed on every shoulder. The villa was large, modern rustic, the sort of place that belonged to a celebrated food writer and the child of privilege. Nothing about its exterior suggested it harbored secrets of the crown. The door yielded silently to an expert pick. Inside, the air was warm, ordinary. The ground floor and upper floors were furnished with tasteful, comfortable luxury. Books, photographs, the easy clutter of an affluent life. The team began a methodical sweep. Every room, every cupboard, every drawer was examined in sequence. The upper floors revealed only clothes, papers, and the usual detritus of daily life. The silence grew heavier. The protection officers began exchanging glances. The curator's brow creased. Doubt had started to creep in. If nothing was found, the consequences would fall hardest on Sophie and, by extension, on the maid Agnes, who would be branded a liar and worse. Time dragged. Each passing minute felt like a stone laid on Sophie's chest. She was gambling her entire reputation, her relationships, perhaps her future within the family. She could sense the skepticism thickening around her. Failure would paint her as a reckless troublemaker who had wounded the monarchy's dignity at its most fragile moment. She stood in the center of the drawing room, eyes sweeping over the tasteful decor, searching for anything, any tiny anomaly that might have been missed. The very ordinariness of the house had become the most unsettling thing of all. One of the officers had been studying the original architect's plans, yellowed and creased. He frowned, turned the pages again, then froze. A subtle discrepancy. A pocket of floor area beneath the kitchen and pantry that was marked on the old drawings, but absent from every later plan. An unaccounted void sealed off after the original construction. He signaled Sophie. The team converged on the kitchen. Behind a heavy wine cabinet, they uncovered a small, almost invisible steel door. Flush with the wall, locked and camouflaged with chilling perfection. It led downward to a space the official plans pretended did not exist. Sophie's instincts turned to ice. They had found it. The atmosphere in the kitchen became thick as lead. They were no longer hunting for misplaced trinkets. They stood on the threshold of physical proof of a conspiracy. Sophie gave the order. The officer worked with the specialized tools with steady hands. The metallic scrape of the lock echoed harshly in the midnight hush. When the bolt snapped back, Sophie did not rush forward. She drew a slow breath, steeling herself for whatever waited below. Her gaze swept across the faces of her team. Every trace of doubt had been replaced by taut anticipation. They all knew that, on the other side of that steel door, lay the truth about Queen Camilla's hidden ambition. With a soft, reluctant hiss, the steel door swung inward, revealing a steep concrete steps descending into darkness. The lead protection officer swept a powerful torch beam downward. A breath of cold, damp air rose to meet them, utterly alien to the warm luxury above. Sophie gave a curt nod and led the way down. The basement was small, heavily reinforced, and soundproofed. Yet instead of wine racks or forgotten furniture, it had been converted into a clandestine strong room. Torchlight glided across neat rows of objects on steel shelving, and inside sealed oak cases. Sophie recognized them at once. These were the sacred relics of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Not mere antiques, but fragments of British history itself. Miniature private coronets used only in the most intimate ceremonies. Diamond and pearl brooches whose provenance was known only to the inner circle. Personal items such as a worn silver hairbrush, engraved with the cipher E*2R. And there, on a black velvet draped table at the center, sat the official jewel box itself. Still locked, yet unmistakably removed from its inviolable palace vault. A wave of fury and grief crashed through Sophie. Agnes's story had been true, every word. These objects belonged to the crown and to history, not to any individual. To find them hidden here, in the secret cellar of a man outside the royal line, was an outrage beyond forgiveness. While the team began methodically photographing and cataloging upstairs, a household staff member had quietly placed a panicked call. Minutes later, tires screeched on gravel. Tom Parker Bowles strode into his own house and froze at the sight of the open basement door and torchlight spilling from below. The normally urbane food writer went deathly pale. Panic flashed across his face as he hurtled down the stairs and came face to face with Sophie and the royal protection officers standing among the stolen treasures. Denial came first, loud and aggressive. He tried to block their path, insisting the items were legitimate family heirlooms, demanding they cease this illegal intrusion at once. But the strain of impending scandal was already cracking his composure. In blind desperation, he turned away, fumbling for his phone, retreating into a shadowed corner to whisper urgently. No words were audible, but the contortion of fear on his face said everything. The plot was exposed. When he spun back, his tone had shifted to threat. He fixed Sophie with a venomous stare, warning her in barely veiled terms that she would pay dearly for meddling, that his mother's power would crush her. Sophie did not flinch. Her expression remained serene, her eyes hard as flint. She ordered the vault sealed and every item secured against further movement or damage. Then she instructed an officer to open the king's private emergency channel. This could no longer be handled by a report. Sophie requested that King Charles and Princess Anne, as unimpeachable witnesses, come to the villa in person to see the truth with their own eyes. Tension in the cellar became almost solid. Tom leaned against the wall, surrounded by irrefutable evidence and encircled by royal authority. He knew the game was over. Sophie stood amid the stolen symbols of a reign, waiting in the cold torchlight for the king to arrive and deliver final judgment. The air inside the secret vault beneath Tom Parker Bowles' villa had turned thick and suffocating. Tension reached its peak when the unmistakable sound of royal cars drew up outside and King Charles, followed by Princess Anne, entered the house. The arrival of the two most powerful figures of the reign transformed the dim cellar into a silent, private court of judgment. King Charles descended the stairs with a face carved from stone, eyes glacial. Behind him came Princess Anne, whose lifelong intolerance for wrongdoing was legendary. Sophie stepped aside, granting the king and his sister unobstructed sight of the evidence. Charles approached the velvet-draped table, where the official jewel box rested in accusing silence. He touched nothing. He simply let his gaze travel slowly over every stolen piece, the intimate coronets, the historic brooches, the small silver brush worn smooth by his mother's hand. Recognition was immediate and agonizing. Though his expression remained controlled, his shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. Princess Anne needed no explanation. She identified each item instantly, relics that had accompanied her mother through decades of duty. Surprise did not register on her face, only cold, implacable fury. To her, this was an execration of memory itself, an unforgivable treason against the late queen. She gave Sophie a single, grave nod, wordless confirmation that every accusation had been true. Once the king and Princess Royal had seen enough, Sophie signaled the protection officers. Agnes, now in a fresh uniform, was brought in. She entered trembling yet upright, the fear in her eyes tempered by the pride of one who had chosen truth over safety. She stood before the sovereign she had served all her life, pointed silently to the exact spot where she had overheard the plot, and with small, precise gestures reenacted the moment Queen Camilla issued her clandestine orders. The quiet courage of this lifelong servant, surrounded by the mightiest in the realm, painted a stark tableau of betrayal met by loyalty. Under the unbearable weight of irrefutable proof and the sovereign's presence, Tom Parker Bowles collapsed inwardly. From the instant the king appeared, he had been restrained in a corner of the vault. The arrogance and aggression he had shown Sophie evaporated. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His body swayed. A final, feeble attempt at defiance died unspoken. There was nowhere left to hide. He was escorted from the cellar and driven straight to Buckingham Palace. In a closed chamber of the Privy Council, beneath the combined pressure of the king and his most senior advisors, Tom's defenses shattered completely. At last, in a series of broken gestures, shaken hands, and barely audible whispers, he confessed everything. The purpose had never been mere safekeeping. It was a calculated political maneuver orchestrated by his mother, Queen Camilla. By sequestering the ultimate symbols of royal authority, she had sought to retain absolute leverage, an insurance policy against any future shift in family influence or public favor. Should the balance of power ever tilt against her, she would still hold the physical emblems that command reverence and legitimacy. The chamber fell into a silence heavier than stone when the final admission was made. The truth stood naked and undeniable. King Charles closed his eyes for a long moment, as though absorbing the full, terrible weight of it. The web of secrecy had been torn apart. Justice, however late and painful, had finally prevailed. In the wake of Tom Parker Bowles's shattering confession, Buckingham Palace sank into a cold, unspoken tension. For 3 full days and nights, King Charles secluded himself with his most trusted legal advisors, Princess Anne and the Duchess of Sophie, wrestling with a crisis of honor without precedent. The solution had to balance justice, the protection of Queen Elizabeth's legacy, and the bare minimum of dignity required to keep the monarchy itself intact. At last, the king issued his irrevocable, ultra-confidential decree. Queen Camilla was ordered to surrender every hidden relic immediately and in full. The entire contents of the secret vault were escorted back to the royal strong rooms under the personal supervision of Princess Anne and Sophie, sealed once more where it belonged. Beyond that, Camilla was permanently stripped of any future unsupervised access to the symbolic treasures of the crown. Her authority within the family suffered a silent, devastating blow. Though the public remained entirely unaware of the scandal, every courtier and housemaid felt the chill. The queen consort's standing had been irreparably stained by naked personal ambition. Tom Parker Bowles, the son who had carried out the scheme, faced far harsher and more public consequences. Tried in a closed session of the royal court, he was stripped of every informal title, privilege, and benefit attached to the family. Formal imprisonment was quietly waived at the king's insistence to spare the institution greater humiliation. But Tom's reputation was annihilated. Word of greed and betrayal spread like poison through high society and the carefully managed press. He became a pariah, his name forever linked to disgrace. Sophie, by contrast, emerged with her moral authority immeasurably strengthened. The king privately acknowledged her as the true guardian of his mother's legacy, while Princess Anne, whose respect is rarely given lightly, accorded her a regard worth more than any honor. Sophie's public standing and charitable influence soared. She was now seen as the living embodiment of integrity, courage, and unwavering loyalty to Elizabeth's spirit. Her role within the family had been transformed, from a quietly dutiful figure to an indispensable pillar of conscience. And Agnes, the brave maid who had risked everything, received the reward her silent loyalty deserved. Through Sophie, the king granted her a substantial private pension and a senior position directly responsible for the care of historic collections. More valuable than money, she became a quiet legend within the palace staff. The whispered tale of a housemaid who dared defend history itself reinforced faith in decency and tradition every time it was retold below stairs. The story closed on a fragile return to calm. The priceless relics, meticulously inventoried once more, were restored to their rightful vaults under security tighter than ever before. The episode left a deep scar across the royal family, yet it also engraved an indelible lesson. The legacy of the crown does not belong to personal ambition, nor can it be manipulated by transient power. It belongs to duty, to history, and to absolute fidelity to the principles that have sustained the monarchy for centuries. Justice had been served, the truth, though shielded from the public gaze, had permanently redrawn the balance of power within the palace walls. After finishing the story, in your opinion, is King Charles's judgment, handling it discreetly to preserve the royal family's dignity, the action of a wise king, or is it a weak compromise with Queen Camilla's mistake? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.